Hello, so this is our second part of John chapter 4. In the previous part, we already talked about the setting and the beginning of a conversation between Jesus and a Samaritan woman. Now, if you want the setting, please go back to the previous chapter. I will start at the beginning of this conversation and go quickly to where we left off. So we'll start in John chapter 4 and verse 7, and God willing, we'll get to verse 30. Rather than reading the entire thing at once, I'm going to read the section before I talk about it, and I'm going to skip the verses about the disciples until next time. So verse 7, there cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus saith unto her, give me to drink. And we talked about how Jesus probably was not physically thirsty, but thirst represents any desire, and he had a desire to serve God. And God laid that woman on his heart. So his thirst was to get her saved, to tell her the truth. And he had to start the conversation, and she was coming to draw water, and this well gave a very good object lesson. Now, as we go past verse 8, where the disciples, just says the disciples aren't there, and we get to verse 9, we see a prejudiced response. Now, the Samaritans weren't normally the people that were known for being prejudiced. They were the people that received the prejudice. They were hated by the Jews. And she's marveling that Jesus would talk to her because she's in a group that the Jews hate. And Jesus is a Jew. But reverse discrimination is still prejudice. Every single one of us has a prejudice. That we don't have all the facts yet. We make a decision on what we think about it. We can't get rid of the prejudice. You know what we can do? We can be ready to be proved wrong and give people a chance to. And she does, even with her negative response here. Let's read the response. Verse 9, then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, how is it that thou, being a Jew, askest to drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Most of the Jews would rather die than ask for help from a Samaritan. So we see a prejudice here, a negative response. She is not open to the gospel. And this is what we get with most people in the United States today. They're like this woman, kind of confused spiritually. They've had so many different truths told to them. They don't know what to believe. But then we get down to verse 10 and we see Jesus' answer. We left off with this last time. Jesus did not answer her prejudice and say, I'm not prejudiced. That would almost have confirmed it. Jesus completely ignores what she says and just turns the talk to God. Now, we started with the well. We started with water. He's continuing with this thought. In verse 10, Jesus answered and said unto her, if thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, give me to drink, thou wouldst have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. Now, most of this we talked about last time. I want to talk about the living water before I go on. This word living could mean alive, but we know water's not alive. It also can mean having vital power, the power to keep or make alive. So he's not talking physical here. But as we go on, we're going to see in verse 11 and 12, that the woman is thinking very physically. The woman saith unto him, Sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. From whence hast thou that living water? Art thou greater than our father Jacob, which gave us the well, and drank thereof himself, and his children, and his cattle? So verse 11, her problem is, he doesn't have anything to draw water with. She's thinking, you're saying that you physically have water, but you just asked me for water. This well's too deep for you to get water without a bucket. You need a string to let the bucket down, and then you pull the bucket back up. And then he's saying, living water, you're saying your water is better than Jacob's water? The idea here isn't, there's no faith here. She's looking physically. But he started. He's using an object lesson of the water. So she doesn't understand. But she responds by asking him a question, which gives him a chance to answer. And this thinking physically, this asking where it's from, this asking if he's better than Jacob, well, he doesn't respond directly to either question again. As we go into verse 13, Jesus answered and said unto her, Whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst, but the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. Now, the first thing we have to remember is the pronouns are not the way modern English uses them. Proper English uses masculine pronouns to refer to any group of person that has at least one male. This is including females in getting this water. This is not saying only men get it. Now, Jesus answered and talks about the well. Physical water can satisfy thirst and keep a person alive for a time, but they're going to need to go back and get more water the next day, and they'll eventually die no matter how often they go back and get water. That's what is. No one can argue with that. Now he's going to compare what he's talking about. Whoever drinks the water that I shall give, Jesus' water, yes, is better than Jacob's water. Why? Once you get it, you never thirst again. Now, in this world, we have physical desires. We're not talking about water anymore. And these physical desires, whether it be for food, gratification, whatever our physical desire is, our lust, we can fill it and we can make it so we feel not as bad or better. But it comes back and is stronger and stronger, and it eventually destroys our life. But turning to God, as long as we're with God, we are satisfied. There's that desire, that lust doesn't come back because we've got it. It just gets better and better. Well, we can get away from God and we can feel desire to get back to God again. But as long as we're with God, as long as we're drinking from that well, we never have to have that feeling of, I need or want something I don't have again. Well, but he's saying that this water we drink from, this desire we fill with his God, doesn't lead to destroying our lives by overindulging in it, by giving up everything else to get more of it. It leads to everlasting life. Now, as I talked about in the previous, everlasting means perpetual, never ending. It starts now and it continues. He is saying this water has the power to make it so you will never die. Now, we know he's talking spiritually because physically people still die even after they're saved. But she's still thinking physically. But guess what? She's intrigued. She'd never heard of anything like that. She doesn't have any faith yet. She does not believe that what he's saying is true. She's seen nothing to make him different than any other person talking. But in verse 15, the woman replies, saith unto him, Sir, give me this water, that I may not thirst, neither come hither to draw. She's thinking physical. Well, if I have this water, I'll never need to come again and draw. I'll never need to face the heat of the day, being that outcast. It sounded good to her, but she didn't really believe it would happen. Basically, it's like, I'll bite. Prove it. You know, people don't have to start with belief. Belief is the result of seeing evidence. She gave him permission to show evidence. Now we're in what we would call the gospel today. How did he get into the gospel? By saying there was a benefit from the gospel. So now when Jesus starts the gospel, he starts the same way we start today. He starts by dealing with sin. There's a reason we need God's help. And we need to admit we need God's help or we cannot go on. So Jesus says a very short sentence. Go, call thy husband and come hither. Jesus is God. He knows everything. He knew what her sin was. Her sin was that she was living with a man that she was not married to. And he knew that she didn't have a husband to call because she'd had 5. We can't do this. What we can do is give Bible saying everyone's sinned and give a list of sins in the 10 Commandments and give Sermon on the Mount where it talks about those 10 sins, or give Romans chapter 3 where we have a long list of things that every person does wrong, and just trust that God will convict that person's heart and bring them to a place where they'll admit that they've sinned to the point they do not deserve God. But here, the woman denies the sin. It's very common today for people we talk to deny sin. To say, well, I may have done something wrong, but it's not that bad. The woman's denial in verse 17. I have no husband. Still in verse 17, Jesus goes on. He does not give up. Jesus saith unto her, Thou hast well said, I have no husband. For thou hast had 5 husbands, and he whom thou now hast is not thy husband. And that saidst thou truly. She didn't lie. And we don't like to lie. We just like to look at the pieces of information that help us and ignore the ones that don't. Jesus brought out the full picture. Even when we turn to the news, we've got to do that because the news doesn't give us the full picture. They give us what they want us to see, what supports what they want to say. They don't show us that there's the possibility of a second opinion. They don't take the effort to discredit that second position. They just tease it. Hey, if you don't believe us, you're wrong. Well, that's not the way to do it. Proper news would say, hey, this is what we believe. This is why we believe it. This is what others say. And hey, well, they might have something. This is why we don't believe what they say is true. And it fully examines it. If news ever started doing that, I'd pay more attention to it. But right now, I've got to look at what the liberals say, what the conservatives say, and then I've got to try to research and figure out what part of what's right. Because all of them lie openly without any remorse. It's not like there's a right and wrong in news. Well, she's used to living in that world. And she starts with that response. Well, I'm going to give you the parts of the truth that benefit me. Jesus said, no, there's the whole truth. And he laid it out. When we find that whole truth, the truth is, we don't deserve God. No person that's ever been born, is alive, or ever will live earns heaven. Now we see what I call partial faith in verse 19 and 20. The woman saith unto him, Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. She said, You're right. You read my mind. You know my life, even though we've never met before. Now, this is one of 2 uses of the word prophet, someone who can tell the future or know what they have not been taught. When we examine 1 Corinthians closely, there's 3 chapters that talk about spiritual gifts. They particularly talk about tongues and prophecy, and they say that these 2 are not happening today. Prophecy is running idle, tongues has ended forever. That's because these signs were meant for people who were not having the Bible. Without the Bible, you need some way to know that it's from God. And those signs proved it was from God. We now have the complete Word of God. So there's no need for them. Well, there's a tribulation time coming, and the Bible is going to be so persecuted, so hated, so destroyed, that there's going to be, again, groups of people that cannot access the Bible. So there's going to be a need for prophecy again. Tongues, however, was only to the Jews that did not believe to prove to them that they were wrong. At that point in the tribulation, all the Jews are going to wake up. The Bible says 144,000 that believe are the only ones that are considered Jews in the tribulation. The Jews don't need the witness anymore, because at that point in the tribulation, they'll recognize what God said is true and they will believe. Well, I'm out of time, and we'll continue next time with talking about how this lady responded, and then we'll go into what's happening with the disciples in the meantime and the result. Thank you for your time.